Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast. I'm your co-host, Brandon Jones, joined by the legendary Sam Simmons. How you doing today, Sam?
You know, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine.
Just fine. It's been a
Yeah,
lot happening.
absolutely. Absolutely. You know, yeah, being here in Minneapolis, we're bombarded every day. Almost look forward to the weekend, long as you don't watch no news channels with the trial, right? And with my weekly local radio show, we've been doing a weekly summary of the trial. You know, I think I mentioned. I think one of the things is that initially I was reluctant to do that, but it went well the first week. And it seemed like it was something the community wanted to do, to talk about their feelings about it and how it was going. And we did it again this week, and kind of, you know, talked about, all the police officers who testified, also um, all the experts this week that testified to go up against the defense's ideal that um, drugs and a person's health condition was responsible for for his death. Um, and Which was interesting, I guess. Um, but it brought a few extra thoughts in there for me. One is we really need to pay attention to this defense. Uh, it might not work this time, and we can talk about that whole piece. Is when we look at health disparities, we look at black male health disparities, and they're going to start using health disparities that is due to uh, uh, the white uh, uh, institutions and that piece. Think about it. So we're going to put your health up against how we take your life, right?
Yeah.
And I know, in terms of doing the work I do, is nothing for black men to die early from their health, right? I mean, if you check, unfortunately, if you check a lot of men's heart conditions at the age of 50 in terms of plaque and all those kind of things, you might find pretty close to the same kind of heart condition that they described of George Floyd, right? It's interesting. You have the conditions set up to be negative, and then you use them same conditions against the folks who are suffering negatively. That was one thing that came up in my mind that I thought about. The other one is, all of the folks, especially in the mainstream community, man, look at all those police testifying against Chauvin, and even the chief of police testifying against Chauvin. We never seen this before. I mean, this is, the blue wall is coming down, that kind of stuff. And my thought about that is they're trying to say this ain't what we do,
Mhm.
right? They're trying to separate the police department from this one, that whole addict, the one bad apple conversation. This is so appalling. This is not what we do. You follow me?
Yep.
And that's such a joke.
Right.
That is such a joke, right? Um, we are evolved in Minneapolis and all this other kind of thing, and this guy, he's so awful. Uh, we don't condone this behavior. This is not our training. Because now, just think about it. The chokehold was legal not too long ago. Maybe not the knee chokehold, right?
Right.
Okay, and so I I I know that black folks ain't blinded by this charade, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I don't say this in to be all hyper negative or anything like that because um because I kind of like the police chief. I know him, that kind of stuff. And I know what he's trying to do as a black police officer here in
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota. And we got to take consideration. Several years ago, he even sued the police department, him and other black officers, right? So it's not a full reflection on him, but a reflection on this whole thing about that whole story about the one bad apple, right?
Right.
And this morning I'm watching the news and they're talking about this incident where this brother is stopped in his car in Virginia, military dude, right?
Yeah. With the military uniform on.
Right. Pulled over talking about, he didn't have he had a brand new SUV. He don't have no regular license plate on it, but he got the temporary license in the back window. They pull him over, and what he does is he go up with his flashers on to a lighted area. Lucky for him,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know what would have happened if he wasn't in a lighted area with all kind of cameras on them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he was asking them. They never even said why they were stopping him because they
Mm-hmm.
pissed off like they pissed off because the nigga ran.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like you didn't follow our commands, and what why didn't you get the car? Well, personally, I'm a little afraid got the car. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about a military man.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about he afraid got the car.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They maced him. He can't see. And see, and that's the stuff that irritates me is just because he walked away alive, is those police officers the good ones?
Right.
Are they the good ones? So, so yeah, following the case, folks are tense around here. You got some folks making sure they're in front of the camera and all this other kind of stuff. Um, so it's been tough. Um, um, but the other thing that's interesting is, we and they did a skit about this on Saturday Night Live last night, where they had uh, the black newscasters and the white newscasters, and the white newscaster says, well, look at the police that testified against him, and there's no way he gonna get off. And the black newscaster said, well, I don't know. I seen one this morning talking about, shoot, she went as far as he might get off scot free. And even
Mm-hmm.
my folks who called in the show was talking about, you know, uh, uh, a hung jury because you only need one.
Yeah.
You only need
Mm-hmm.
one. Folks. No matter what we see and all like this, uh, 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 are not that convinced that this man is going to be convicted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is like is this is not a new rodeo for us.
Right.
But all the other part of mainstream, they all hyped. This is he's gonna go to jail, and they can't. Ain't no way they're gonna be able to not convict him. And don't you feel no? And we're talking about not we're talking about throughout the community because they already discount the brothers and sisters in the community. But when
Right.
you start getting so-called educated, respectable black folks who say, "Oh no,
Right.
educated and respectable don't mean that you ain't black no more,
Right.
right? Black
Mm-hmm.
in America, okay? So that's my some of my thoughts on that. Any thoughts on that?
yeah, I think week one, I was like, "There's no way they're about to convict him." Week two, I had a little bit more of, well, maybe. But this week, I was more like back into I don't know. And I definitely do not think that Derek Chauvin will get convicted on second or third degree murder. I don't even know. I mean, I kind of I don't I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know why that was even. I think those two charges, there is so much confusion that those two are not going to stick. I think manslaughter is the best that they can get, and that's even going to be hard to prove. And it's awful because regardless if it gets off or not, the pain has already been done, and the injury is there to us. And I think that either way, especially as a black collective or a black community, we're gonna be let down by whatever happens. Even if he gets convicted, I don't think he's gonna do crazy amount of time. So we have to be able to prepare ourselves from an emotional and psychological standpoint for whatever happens, and we have to continue to move forward and produce justice for our own selves and our own families and protect ourselves. Because I don't think that we're going to get the desired outcome that we want. Like we want him to get hit with all the legal charges, and I just don't see that happening. This whole thing with him having drugs in his system, I don't think that that's what killed him. But damn, it's like it's so damning, and even now they're trying to spin it. That's where everything's gonna get caught up for me.
Yeah, yeah. And but the other piece is the experts, the one older dude who just broke it down. I mean, he broke it down.
Hmm.
And all the experts even talked about not even having the amount of drugs in his system weren't as significant as they tried to make it.
Right.
So that piece, you know, I mean, that professor, he broke that thing down that if I had a class of his, I might show up, because he broke he broke that down big time. I mean, and then when he got down to going by second, it says he's alive here and he's dead here.
Mm,
And then he counted 3 more minutes
mhm,
with the knee on his throat.
mm,
Right? That was so compelling.
mhm.
You know what I mean? And so again, if we were in a system as a black person we could believe in, we might have a different view on the outcome. And I
Right.
but the thing is the anxiety. I mean, I've had folks on my radio show in tears,
Yeah.
okay? Um but at the same time, thanked us for actually allowing the community to have this conversation
Right.
about the summary and that kind of thing. Um, you know, and there's question that if there's question and rumor that one thing that might not come up in the trial is that Chauvin knew Floyd.
Yeah. Their previous history.
Yeah. Okay. Um, at one of the places that he was a bouncer at, and Chauvin was the off-duty police officer, and they originally interviewed this woman, and now folks say they can't find her.
Mm,
Right? So that's the scuttlebutt behind. Ooh, I'm using the good white word. Scuttlebutt behind the scenes within the
mhm,
community, because again, people talk to me, right,
mhm,
and they send me this stuff, and and again, I remember the interview they had with her on the
mhm,
news. So um, there's and that hasn't come up, and the question is, will it? Since they believe by Tuesday the defense will be taking over the trial.
mm.
So I don't know right now if I have any additional thought on that at this point. Um, So there's so much going on this week. You know, um, what else? Because
Well,
this is one of our more open pieces.
well, the week got kicked off with our guy, the truth, Mr. Paul Pierce,
Uh
living his best life at the poker game, doing his thing on IG Live, and ultimately getting fired about 48 hours later from ESPN. So that was fascinating. I'm still scratching my head to why he went on IG Live. I don't know why I mean, he was lit. He was definitely drunk and high, for sure. But damn, man, he just kind of did it to himself.
and and
Oh man,
and Jesus and Mero, they talked about it, and they said uh uh the woman in the background, the stripper doing the twerking, she said, "Who is he twerking? Who is she twerking for?" Because it's like everybody else is just sitting down all
yeah,
over the place, and they're like right in the camera,
yeah,
right? And then what got me when I watched the video, he used to do a weekly show on NBA, right?
hmm
He called out the woman who does the show.
yeah. Rachel Nichols, yeah,
Yeah, where's Rachel? It's
yeah.
like, oh my God. It's like, oh, you so through. And as much as ESPN, in terms of the women's sports and that kind of stuff, and and
This is
and the
not the
fact
air.
that they done brought more females on board, trying to really give that
This
piece.
thing.
And then Disney owned this ESPN too. And then there's folks in the community talking about, man, they done him wrong. If he was a white boy, that wouldn't have never
No,
happened. Man, please.
he was wilding.
I
I,
mean, I mean, you know, even if that piece is true, and you talk about every day how unfair things are, right?
right.
And you know that,
Why would you do
why
it?
would it's like,
Why would you do
because I always tell my
it? Oh
guys,
man.
you don't get to pick how you're gonna be punished. Because punishment
Wow.
ain't fair either,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I know that a lot of the, black commentators on ESPN ain't touching this.
Right.
They ain't going
No.
nowhere close
Man.
to this.
Mhm.
Smart move.
Yeah.
Smart move.
Wilding, man. Dang.
You know. I mean, man, it's like, and Paul Pierce, Boston and all like that, considered him be an intelligent young man, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. He has his moments and that kind of stuff, but man, yeah, that was a little, if you're gonna party that hard, you got to party that hard off the
Oh,
camera.
it can't be
It'd
online.
be, and it would be different, slightly different, if somebody else filmed it,
Right.
right,
Right.
and turned it in,
Right.
you
No,
know.
he obviously didn't care. But again, as we always talk about, Trump was about the moment. And I think he just had a moment where he was just like, "This is what it is. I don't even care. I'm living my best life. I'm having fun." And boy, it like comes at you fast. But I knew
Yeah,
right when it leaked out the next day on that Sunday, I was like, he's done. And there's no way they're gonna keep him. Not in this climate.
no,
Absolutely not. All the heat ESPN's gotten for being racist and sexist, absolutely not gonna happen.
no. And the way they treated Jamel, you
Right.
know, you
Exactly. That's what
know,
I'm saying. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, and oh, but we'll talk a little bit more about the whole framework around toxic masculinity, because I got an interesting thought about that as a whole. On top of that, and then we lost DMX this week.
Yeah. Earl Simmons.
Yeah,
Yeah. He passed drug overdose, apparently heart attack took him out. Um, so yeah, again, pain and trauma, right? Here's an artist, definitely a legendary hip hop artist for sure. in many people's top 10, um, who really became popular for showing his pain and showing it and expressing his trauma through music. Like many creatives expressing their trauma and utilizing art to cope. That's what DMX did, and he helped millions. He helped the thousands to millions of people by going through his own issues and sharing them with the world. It's unfortunate that he had to die at 50 years old. He definitely had more time to spend, and it's also unfortunate that all his children are left behind without their father. I think one of
But
the more touching videos was the video. I don't know if you've seen the video clip where he was at like Six Flags with his daughter, and they were going up the slingshot ride, and the girl's scared, and he's just there like, "Daddy's got you, Daddy's right here," like that. Those are those moments. It was like, damn, man, like that girl's dad is gone.
you say he helped folks. What do you mean by that?
I believe through his music, DMX has helped people. He's helped people through college. He's helped people who had their own mental health issues. I've even heard some men who've been sexually abused that said that DMX's music helped them through it. So I think just through his art form, he's been able to touch people. I don't know if he was doing that deliberately, but people interpret music and just like they interpret any art from their own perspective. So to me, I think that he's helped people just through music.
Yeah, and the thing is, you bring up the thing about trauma. When we look at many of our artists, especially uh, both black male and female, and some of the most prolific ones, when you look in their life and look at the amount of trauma that they went through. We got Prince here locally. You got DMX. So we can go down the list. Um, you know, um, and where they talked about Prince working all the time. One of the things I realized about trauma and just realizing some of the stuff I've dealt with, and a lot of my stuff has not come to the level of other folks's, but going to sleep ain't one of the things you want to do.
Yeah, that's part of my problem too. Staying
Yeah,
up too late.
yeah. Going
Working.
to sleep ain't one of the things you want to do,
Right.
right? I mean, keeping yourself, because that's another way of dealing with trauma without dealing with it, is keeping yourself distracted.
Hmm.
And then if you find something that you enjoy, right, and using that, and of course, if you spend all that time in it, it's going to be at another level. But
Right.
but at the same time, it never help. In most cases, it never helps you recover or start healing the healing process from the trauma.
Right.
It just contains it,
Mhm.
right? And that's that whole thing of distraction, even distraction of terrorizing other folks, distraction of partying at a level that is not even healthy for you or other people,
Right.
right? um and when we talk about male trauma, as we often talk about how it's ignored, and in some of the results of that trauma are almost magnified, right? When we look in some of our music and some of our art and that kind of thing, um is really, really sad. Because again, like you talk about, if you look in DMX's past, some of his past, I read up on some of his past, is almost similar to mine, being raised in a religious home, which is a whole nother conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and his relationship with dogs,
Mhm.
you know, he felt closer to dogs than he felt to people.
Mhm.
Right? And I seen an interview he did on one of the black radio shows, where he's talking about his uncle who laced his joint when he was a teenager,
Mhm.
and him being in tears. Why would you do that to me?
Mhm.
Right? And my whole thing is his exposure to drugs to start with, even because that was 14.
Right. Right.
And I watched another commentator on YouTube. We talked. He strictly talked about, the drug use and, and how stupid drug use is and how, in the community we would glorify drug use and never ever touched on the trauma.
Yeah.
Never ever. I
Mhm.
mean, practically spent a whole hour on the drug use,
Yeah.
right? But never said anything about trauma. And we
I,
know who do this work, drug use is attached to the trauma in our
right.
community
And
quite often,
directly,
right?
directly attached. Yeah.
And like I said, so if I'm wake, how do I want to be wake? You
Mhm.
know, because when I talk about the sleep, I dread sometime trying to go to bed because I spend probably an hour just trying to get my mind to shut off from some of the crazy thoughts I have and that kind of stuff. And that's been since I was a kid.
Yeah. Mm.
You know, I'm better, but still, I end up probably staying up sometime later than I should, just the thought of going to bed,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? And so it's sad. And the other thing is there's a number, there's a consistent number when we look at the lives of many black men that I know hitting 50,
Yep.
hitting 50.
If you make it past 30.
Right. Yeah. If you
Yeah.
make it past 30, because see the problem is, see, you bring up a whole nother thing. The
Mhm.
problem is you are so lucky that you made it past 25. You saying
Right.
30,
Right.
past
Right.
25, that we don't really have a plan for 50.
Right. Right.
So there's a bunch of black men who are 50 years old who are in bad health, broken down, because they never had a plan after, and they barely had a plan at 25 or to get
Mhm.
to 25, right? You got these a whole bunch of black men who have 50 because they didn't have a plan, who have children and
Mhm.
people in their lives that don't have nothing to do with them.
Right. Mhm. Unfortunately.
Have nothing to do with them because in our process of in some cases celebrating past 25, we have went through relationships in a traumatic way that we never made those connections for folks to be for you when you're 50.
Right.
So if you look at, and I often say that when you look at entertainers, black entertainers versus white entertainers and the ages they die, that 50 man,
Mhm.
50, 55, and I'm even thinking about folks here that I knew here who are like in professions and stuff, heart attack, 50 years old,
Mhm.
50, 55, dead, right? And so, as I was saying about Mr. Floyd and the autopsy and talking about his heart and all like that, and being used to try to say, well, he's going to die anyway, basically.
Yeah.
So what's the big deal,
Which is crazy. Damn.
right? But again, if you check a lot of 50-year-old black men, their heart might be in that kind of condition,
Condition.
and
Right.
and they don't even know.
Right. Mhm. Yep.
And um, yeah, my thoughts has been all over the place this week, and probably one of the reasons I didn't have a one particular topic this week as I usually try to do.
Mhm.
And now any other thing before I go into this next topic, which has been a little disturbing for me this week as well.
No, I think you're. I think the connection between Paul Pierce, the Derek Chauvin trial, George Floyd's death, and DMX is very important. When we talk about just the plight, the stress that black men just go through on a day to day. This is what ends up happening. Is it ultimately starts to affect our health, mental, physical, and spiritual health, and we just go through this world. So we, one of the common terms that me and you talked about has been racial battle fatigue. That's one level, but this is like a whole other complex piece to that puzzle, which is black male identity and black male wellness, which is hard for us to even maintain. And we don't even have constructive ideas on what being well is for black men. Like, what is our wellness? Like, that's one of the things that we really have to consider and push forward and craft a narrative around because we are literally dying. We're having a slow death. When a term by a man by the name of Dr. Bobby E. Wright created a term called menticide. He talks just about how living in this system slowly kills us, and we don't even realize it. But that's what ultimately is end up happening. But part of that, to link to the next point that you want to talk about, is a toxic masculinity piece and how that narrative has been almost branded on the black man is that we are just toxic men. Period. Like there's no other black man but a toxic black man, which is like, whoa. But go ahead. I know you have a lot to say on toxic masculinity.
Well, the thing, I'm because I've been working in the field of domestic violence, um, ending violence against women and children, uh, from a black perspective, means that I've also had a lot of interaction with female activists, uh, uh, and which include, you know, uh, white females and those kind of things. And so I'm familiar with the term toxic masculinity. So I decided, and I'm surprised it was my first time doing this in my men's group. We actually did a group on toxic masculinity, right? The guys had no clue what I was talking about.
Right. Because it is not a common. It's a very academic term. It doesn't trickle down into the community.
I mean, they were they're like Mr. Simmons. I mean, they literally got they went silent. They didn't know what to say about this term toxic masculinity. And I don't know what I was thinking because I was like totally surprised that nobody. And I do 2 groups a day, right? And in both groups, they had no idea about what I was talking about. And what I did, and even this probably confused them even more, because we got the little definition. What is toxic masculinity is a way in which patriarchy is harmful to men. First of all, they didn't know what patriarchy meant,
Right.
so we had to break that down, right? And the rest of the definition in reference to the socially constructed attitudes that describe masculine gender roles as violent, unemotional, sexually aggressive, and so forth. And it was in some ways heartbreaking, right? Especially in considering what you said is that parts of our society uh, look at black men as toxic.
That's it.
And so I took the time to break down what patriarchy meant and that kind of stuff. And I made the statement. I say patriarchy, especially in America, white patriarchy is not healthy for black men. But we have a tendency to try to imitate what we think that is.
Mhm.
Because when you ask them about masculinity, they will talk about things like or manhood or whatever. They will talk about things about the head of the house and all these other kind of stuff and taking care of your family and but as a black man, you can't take care of yourself in this society or keep your own self safe.
Right.
So that umbrella or definition becomes another emotional struggle. Another emotional struggle. And And the one thing that really got him is this the term misogyny.
Mhm.
You know, what you mean misogyny? What does that mean? And one of the definitions is dislike, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women.
Mhm.
And they really had a problem with that one.
Hmm. What they say?
Well, the thing is man, I like women. I love women. And it's like, oh, okay. You know. So do you like women or do you like what women do for you?
Mm. Mm.
Or do you like women to prove that you ain't gay?
Uh,
And I ain't right. But
but hey, but there are a lot of men, and we can't even say young men, men in general. That is their primary function, to prove that they ain't no punk, they ain't scared, they ain't gay. They'll use these things as these shields to their issues with
but
actual female.
yeah, but the issue is it ends up being on the back of women,
Right.
right? Trying to prove your masculinity on the back of women and what you do. And I said, why do you think that the least, not all men, because again, we have folks who will probably see this and say you're making blanket statements like this, and if it don't apply to you, don't bother me. How about that? Okay. But what do you say when you're like running a program? I remember I was working for a father program that would help fathers who were struggling so they could be involved in their with children's lives and that kind of stuff. And it was an open program because we're here in Minnesota. There's
Mm.
very few programs of substance that we can have that's just focused on
Black.
black men,
Yeah.
right? And so it was what was noticed by me is my white fathers would come in, and their whole conversation was about a job, about how their child support is not allowing them to keep their job because there was a time, they still kind of do, but not as much, would lock you up for not paying your child support. So if I'm
Right.
locked up, how do I work? Or take your license. So if you take my license, how do I get to work? Right. So
Right.
these men would come in and that kind of stuff. And my black guys, and then the white guys would be embarrassed about not having a job. Right.
Hmm.
And too often my white clients were more concerned about being seen not having a woman than not having a job.
Mm. Yeah. See the difference between the disposition, right?
Right.
Which is so messed up, man. That's so messed up.
But again, we had to dive into the history of that, right? Why
Right.
do you think that we tie so? The question was, why do you think we tie so much of our masculinity to our sexuality?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that comes from, right?
Historical trauma.
Yeah, well, it comes from uh, 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 trauma. It comes from the stereotypical way that people still look at black men, right? And the fact that we sexualize not just black women, but we sexualize black men.
Yep.
Like I
As well.
told them, when
Absolutely.
you start pulling off your shirt and oiling up your body, you think that that's just women we're looking at that.
Right.
And so, and then if we go back, because there's some black folks that don't like to go back. When you start bringing up slavery, that I can get more pushback from black folks than white folks sometimes. And the whole concept around this breeding process,
Mm.
and being sexual toys to white people,
Mm.
and white men being so enamored with black genitalia to the point where when they would get mad at you, they cut it off, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them would cut it off and keep them in jars,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
and use them sexually as entertainment,
Right.
right? And I don't know the gentleman's name right now, but there was a piece I seen where they talked about this uh, gentleman who was enslaved African, and how his owner pimped him out to other plantations.
Mm.
And they talked about how many folks right now are connected back to him through his surname.
Right. Because he just went and populated all these
Well, they
Mendinka
think
women.
they use a number about 100 different
Ooh, man.
children
Yeah.
that he had, and they talked about how many thousands who are, and they talked about what was it, several hundred black men right now are connected to his surname and connected back to him.
Wow. Wow. Mm.
And it's
And
like, and I remember in the hood, how brothers would say, man, one thing, white man might got money, but I can take his woman.
right. Yep. When manhood is valued through what you do with your phallus and not what you build or create, that's when we get into a dangerous spot, a dangerous place.
And as one of our commentators talk about the term, motherfucker, is
Yep.
from that breeding time,
Yep.
where they would literally put a bag over dude's head and say, and have him impregnate, and it might be his mama or his sister.
Mm. Wow.
And then, how does the other ways that show up even now is, you hear these different songs, and these are songs sung by black women talking about, why am I so enamored? Basically, why am I so enamored with Mr. Right than Mr. Wrong than Mr. Right? And Mr. Wrong in a lot of cases is that picture and that stereotype. We got the pretty black, shiny black brother with the dreads, muscular,
Right.
well hung, and ain't got a job. The first, his whole job is, sharing him,
Right.
right? Ain't never homeless. Might
Right.
not have the same home, but ain't never homeless.
Right. Hobosexual.
Yeah, you heard that term before, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Not only have I heard it, before I knew what the term was, I knew hobosexuals. I knew, a whole
And
bunch of them.
say it clearly so people understand what you're saying.
Hobosexual, which is like hobo as in like a homeless person. That's the slang
Right.
term for someone who's homeless. Sexual as in utilizing their sexuality or their sexual piece of their phallus in order to have a place to stay. So they will go from home to home or bed to bed and seek a shelter and resources by providing sex to mostly women, but there's some hobosexuals that will provide some sex to some men as well.
Or
And
both.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, both. That's what I'm saying.
And we're not talking about, because again, we have these stereotypes of what kind of women will deal with him, right?
Right.
But again, if you put all your effort, you put, you, uh, uh, uh,
Just go ahead and lay it out. Say it. Just say it. I guess if you see you trying to edit it, just say it. You
no,
put
man,
all your energy into perfecting that stroke. What else are you good for?
right. I mean, and the ironic part is one thing that, like I said, when I was growing up, you get these brothers talk about, their reasoning for hanging out with white girls, man, I could take that white man's woman, and all this other kind of stuff. And one of the things I realized, he'll let you have her as long as she ain't messing with his bank account.
Right. Or you can watch, because that's a popular thing. I
Right.
don't know if you're familiar with this. There's this concept, the sexual underworld piece, where black men are considered bulls. So
Right.
these are black men who get compensated by having sex with these white women. Usually they're married. Their husbands are the ones that set it up,
Right.
and they'll have sex with them and get paid.
So
It's it's a different life, man.
so now
It's
think
okay.
about, I was having this conversation with a bunch of young men, right? 18 to 30.
Mhm,
And a couple of 30-year-olds look like they 40. I had to look up their birthdays and like, ooh, you
mhm.
know,
Right,
and had to remind them some of the terms they would use when they would talk about women to get them to
mm,
understand those were examples of misogyny.
right, right. Mm,
And when you tie it back to this concept of trauma, when they talk about one site said, what are the most common reasons for misogyny? Misogyny typically is unconscious hatred that men form early in life, often as a result of trauma involving female figures they trusted, and abuse or neglect from a mother, sister,
mhm,
teacher, girlfriend, can plant a seed deep down in their uh, uh, subconscious brain.
mm, mm.
And if we think about that, and I often tell, and I talk about this with both young men and young women, is when that a lot of men, when they get that first painful experience of caring about some woman or being in love with that woman and that kind of stuff, and we don't handle that pain very well, and we'll
Right,
take that pain out on a whole bunch of folks before we slow down and maybe try it again. And we're not even talking about, you know, the hobosexual, although he probably would fit that too, right? We're just talking about men in general and black men in particular, right? And when we talk about that trauma and that abuse, you know, I don't know if you ever see the documentary Iceberg Slim made.
no, I've seen pieces of it. I haven't seen the full thing. Clips on
Well,
YouTube.
but his early relationship with his mama was very tragic.
Hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, she might have been a prostitute, right? Right?
Hmm.
And because the guys were saying, man, what you describing is a pimp. Yeah, yeah, some of you call yourself freelance pimps. You ain't making
Right,
a dime, but you out there, you doing things, leaving evidence, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, there that's the more out there. Iceberg Slim, Richard Pryor, James Brown. Uh, I mean, if you look at their relationships with their moms, which is the one of the most significant relationships in a man's life, in particular, especially in a black man's life. And
hmm,
then we go back to some of the things we've been saying about the crack era and the effect it had on the females in our community, right?
right.
And how that whole thing, when I talk to my men and you listen to them long enough, they do not trust women or
Right,
scared of women hurting them.
right. Hmm.
They never come outright and say that, but
Right.
everything they're
In their
saying
action.
is
Yeah.
saying that.
Right.
And so it's so easy for them to call them out their name. And we're talking about the women they say they care for.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so the idea of having that conversation with those men, and you know what the other piece was is surprising, especially with the young men, when we got to talking about homophobia, they surprised me about that.
Hmm.
And how they surprised me, they said, look, if that's what he is, that's what he is. But the
Hmm.
majority of them who said that had family members
Sure.
who were gay,
Hmm.
right? And have learned to be more accepting,
Sure.
which is counter what we're always told about us and our community,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, um,
They
and
were
the
the
other
most
piece is,
homophobic. Mhm.
huh?
They were the most homophobic people in the
Right.
United States.
The other interesting thing is the one who did have the most problems with it was the most religious,
Hmm. That's not surprising. That's not surprising at all.
right? And so, so it was a interesting conversation that we had, and like I said, for a minute there, I thought they wasn't paying attention because they got quiet. They
Hmm.
got so quiet. It's like, Mr. Simmons, we need time to process this.
Hmm.
You know, just the concept, the terminology, and how those conversations are not being had in those kind of ways within the
Right.
community.
Right.
You know, getting them to pay more attention to their language and their
Hmm.
attitudes, and I do believe that they do care about women.
Hmm.
I love many of them, but this whole thing of this internal extreme distrust and dislike and not knowing how to be in relationship and which actually even leads into the all other relationships. So we get back to the 50-year-old black man who's all alone.
Hmm. Hmm.
Who's
Yep.
all alone.
Yep. Battling. Yeah, we need to have better conversations about what is masculinity for black men that is had by black men and not by others crafting what that is for us. Because unfortunately, we've been our narrative has been developed by mostly everyone besides us, and then those amongst us in the black collective, the black male collective, the ones that have the most disruptive behaviors, a lot of trauma. Those are the ones who kind of give validity to these negative stereotypes, but that's not the whole of who black males are. But since the narrative has been run so long that we're brutes and we're thugs and we're rapists and all these types of things, it's just like you have one or two people that show up in that way, and then it just kind of furthers confirms that mentality for folks, unfortunately.
So, a question to you, Professor.
Mhm.
You since you want to give me titles and stuff.
Well, I am actually a professor.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. We ain't go. Okay, so you go make me have to lose my mind.
Up in here, up in here.
How do we as black men have a conversation about black men without diminishing black women?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that you ask because you know the answer. We have to be able to understand that we can hold ourselves accountable in spite of what black women say or do, and make sure that we're cultivating spaces for black men where we don't have to always lean towards black women. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is we've been so influenced. Well, I mean, we ain't got no other choice because we're together, but we don't know how to have a conversation about manhood and masculinity without involving women or involving sex for that matter. We need to talk
Yeah,
about those things,
yeah. There
but
you
we
go.
haven't been able to break through that. There are other things to manhood besides just sex, and that's where we get caught up on. And unfortunately, we've developed so much our ideal or our vision for manhood through sex, and honestly through a trauma lens, and that's all we know. We know our manhood comes from us having to deal with adversity on one end, and on the other end, on us having sexual conquest with women. That's typically how we talk about our manhood and masculinity. But there's things about what does leadership look like for black men? What is building a community or building businesses or fatherhood or fellowship? We don't talk about those elements or being political. Those are things that to me go into manhood and masculinity that as a collective we don't always talk about.
Yeah, and the other piece is, um, the overwhelming need to be needed, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I also do a group with young black women who are doing very well, by the way,
Hmm.
and have been able to disconnect um their relationships with the men in their lives from what they need to do in their lives and take
For
care of their
themselves.
children.
Right.
And you seeing them get happier and happier and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff, and not just settle for anything, right?
Right.
They can still be whole and not have to tolerate what they think they had to tolerate or what their mamas and them tolerated from the men in their lives, right?
Right.
you know
Mhm.
and so what I've heard from like educated black men in some cases, well, black women think they don't need us. Well, what does that mean? And what is it you want them to need you for,
Mhm.
right? And I've mentioned this before on other broadcasts that we've had. This whole idea when somebody asked me, can we talk about why black women find it necessary to demasculate black men? What are you talking about?
Yeah. That is not.
I
They
mean,
shouldn't even have the opportunity to define manhood. But again, when we don't, somebody will step up and do it for us.
but that's because in some cases, and I might be drawing at straws, we have been doing that for years, allowing other folks to identify us.
Mhm.
And us fitting into those things, or wasting our time trying to fight with the identification instead of
Right.
understanding how you carry yourself is the best way to do that,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And how and responding to things you say are not true, all you do is validate it to be true. Why are you
Right.
responding to it?
Right. Mhm.
Why? I mean, if it ain't true, why? It just kills me. Well, all of us ain't like that. Why why are you? Well, if you ain't like that, like as I say before, leave me alone.
Right.
And um, we talk about being mentors and all this other kind of stuff. But what we're talking about, there's different versions of what we're talking about, no matter what level of education we have in our community amongst black men, what level of economic power we have as black men,
Hmm.
and then want to be mad at white men, but continually trying to imitate some of their sick ass behavior.
Right. Hmm.
And then when we get busted, now we want to be all black, right? What a white man did it, and he didn't go to jail. Key piece, white man did it.
Right.
Second key piece, you not white.
Oh man. Yeah.
You know. So we got about a minute and a half. How do we sum up the day? We uncovered a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
think a good summary is no matter if we're looking at Paul Pierce, we're looking at DMX, rest in peace to him. We're looking at George Floyd, rest in peace to him, and we're looking at what's taking place during this trial of Derek Chauvin. The line of trauma is there. The connection point of trauma is there for all those. And then the lack of understanding of what healthy masculinity is for black men is also there. Because what's on trial right now is was George Floyd an upstanding citizen and black man, or was he a drug abusing thief, brute, porn star? Like that's what's on trial. It's not the fact that this man was killed on that day. He died that day, and that's where we're caught. And unfortunately, until more black men we start to organize together, which is going to be a whole hell of a lot of trouble. But we have to be able to politically, financially, and from the standpoint of education, we have to be better organized as a collective group. And it's not in spite of anybody; it's just to get us better. Black men, we have to be better. We have to be accountable to one another without being focused on the things that really don't matter, like how many people we have sex with, and how many points Steph Curry and LeBron James put up last night.
Right. And you know, I know that people often use the term "us come together." Um, we can't wait for us to come together. We just need more voices because
Mm,
you know how sometimes we gotta lead and let people catch up.
mm,
And in my personal experience, um, that's what I've learned. Because if I waited to come together, a lot of the stuff I talk about would have never been talked about. You
yeah,
know, now am I frustrated that it takes a little bit longer for folks to catch up? Absolutely.
yeah,
And I had to learn to be patient. But if I gave up on this conversation around community trauma, black male trauma, um, I don't know where we had been. I think we might have still got there, but
hmm,
we really have to relook at this whole concept of us coming together as as black men, as a community. We cannot wait to come together to have the conversation. Some of us going to take a little bit more convincing or more intellectual growth over and above white people. It's like,
hmm,
intellectual growth that doesn't include thinking about white people.
right,
We can't ignore them because they ain't gonna let us because it's their system. But we cannot start there, right?
right,
And I think that's a tough conversation for us as black folks, you
right.
know. But that's where the strength is, which brings us up to this whole thing that we probably will eventually talk about as the trial goes on. What does justice look like?
Mm,
I think that will be the next question. What does justice look like? Because justice, no matter what the outcome of this trial is, we're still going to have that question
right,
for
right.
black people.
Yep, yep. Absolutely. Well, we will be coming back next week with that question, and we'll see what transpires through this week of the trial. It has been a very interesting 3 weeks here. Well, really, it's been interesting ever since George Floyd died. But this trial has really set a different tone in this community. I mean, there's a rally going on right now. As I shift some links around on Facebook, it looks like people are protesting right now down University Avenue. So this is where we're at. We'll come back next week. We'll get into what does justice look like. If you're wondering how to get alerts for this podcast on Facebook, if you join the Hillen Brothers Facebook group, you can get alerts for this podcast. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel, Hillen Brothers Podcast on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe there. You can get updates and alerts. Otherwise, if you like the podcast, share it with somebody. If you don't like the podcast, that's fine as well. Still share it and talk about how much you don't like it. So we appreciate that as well. But we're going to continue to have constructive dialogue here on the Haley Brothers podcast, and we'll see you next Sunday. Peace.